You're listening to Rewriting the Rules, the podcast that dares to go deeper than training. I'm Bethany Bell, creator of the Canine Dialogue Dynamics Method, and this is where behaviour meets relationship, science meets the soul, and obedience takes a backseat to understanding. Let's change the conversation. Welcome back to Rewriting the Rules, the podcast where we slow down, reflect deeply, and ask honest questions about how we live and learn alongside dogs. In the last episode, we explored something I called the obedience hangover, that uncomfortable space many of us find ourselves in after realizing that control, compliance, and command-based teaching don't quite match the relationship we want with our dogs. We spoke about how that desire for control often leads us to two polar opposites, either trying to micromanage everything or swinging the other way and doing almost nothing at all in the fear of doing it wrong. And that brings us perfectly to today's topic. Because between those two extremes, the over-managing and the under-guiding is something we're rarely taught how to do. Balance. Not neutral, not perfect, not behaviourless, but emotionally balanced. Whatever that looks like for your dog. Today's episode asks a seemingly simple question. Is there really such thing as a neutral dog? And if not, what are we really trying to achieve? I'm not here to attack anyone's methods or criticise anyone's efforts. Quite the opposite. I'm here to explore with empathy, honesty, and nuance what emotional safety actually looks like for a dog in a human world, especially in social settings where expectations are often high and the advice we receive can either feel overwhelming or oversimplified. Because if you've ever felt like you're walking a tightrope between exposing your dog to too much or shielding them too much, you're not alone. And if you've ever been told that your dog should just ignore other dogs or should be able to walk past barking dogs, screaming children, loud traffic, or unpredictable people without a flicker of reaction, today's episode is especially for you. So let's explore this together. Let's begin with this phrase that floats so casually in the training world. We're aiming for a neutral dog. Or, your dog just needs to be neutral around others. And it sounds so reasonable at first, doesn't it? Not aggressive, not overexcited, not disruptive, just neutral, calm, polite, and predictable. But when we pause, like really pause, and ask ourselves what neutrality actually means, and whether it's realistic, fair, or even a healthy goal, a very different picture starts to emerge. So let's break it down. In many circles, especially within obedience, protection sport, and competitive arenas, a neutral dog is one who can walk through a crowd of barking dogs or past a field of sheep without flinching. A dog who shows no interest in distractions, holds eye contact with their handler, and seems to glide through the world in a bubble of perfect emotional stillness, is presented as a sign of maturity, of discipline. But in truth, it's a sign of suppression. Being neutral in this context doesn't mean that the dog doesn't feel. It just means that they've been taught not to show what they feel. They've been conditioned to internalize, mask, and disconnect from the natural instinct to respond to the world around them. Now, of course, there's nothing wrong with calmness. There's nothing wrong with a dog learning to regulate themselves and move confidently through busy environments. But that's not what neutral really means in many training models. It doesn't mean regulated. It means silent, still, compliant, unbothered by anything, or at least appearing that way. And I want to offer a thought here that might sit with you for a while. Is emotional neutrality even natural for a dog or for any social species? Let's imagine for a moment that we applied the same expectation to a human child. A child who never responds to anything happening around them. No smiling at strangers, no hesitation at loud noises, no pulling towards a friend, no shrinking away from discomfort, just neutral. Would we call that child well behaved? Or would we begin to wonder whether something was missing? Connection, expression, maybe even safety. Because to be neutral is not the same as being socially mature. And being reactive is not the same as being emotionally unstable. Dogs, like us, are relational beings. They're meant to respond, to feel, to observe, to assess, to engage, and yes, sometimes to withdraw. Their eyes are designed to see movement. Their noses are built to detect change. Their ears are attuned to the nuances of sound and tone and rhythm. They are sensory, emotional creatures, not robots. So why do we hold up non-responsiveness as the gold standard of success? The idea of a neutral dog didn't arise out of nowhere. It's a product of specific training environments, particularly military and sports-based models, where dogs are required to ignore distraction in high-stakes settings. In those contexts, being a neutral dog makes sense as a functional skill. But the problem began when the idea leaked into family dog culture, as if the average dog should be trained like a competition dog. When people say, my dog should be neutral to other dogs, what they often mean is, my dog shouldn't bark, my dog shouldn't pull, and my dog shouldn't react at all. But here's the issue. Dogs aren't meant to ignore every dog. They're not meant to walk around the world numb to their environment. They're meant to be selective, sensitive, and smart. In real life, being a neutral dog isn't just unnatural, it can be damaging because it teaches guardians to misinterpret real signs of emotions as failures rather than communication. A dog who looks at another dog and softly wags their tail, that's not a lack of neutrality, that's social interest. A dog who slows down, takes a wide arc, and sniffs the ground when passing someone on a bike, that's not failure, that's self-regulation. And a dog who hesitates and looks to their human when something feels strange, that's not weakness, that's seeking safety through relationship. If we silence those expressions in favor of flat, neutral exterior, we lose something essential. We teach dogs not to show us who they are, and in doing so, we start to measure their success not by their inner well-being, but by how manageable they are in public. So let's reframe the question. Instead of asking, how can I make my dog neutral, we might begin to ask, how can I help my dog to feel emotionally safe, socially aware, and confident enough to respond in appropriate, intelligent ways? Because in truth, we don't need neutral dogs. We need dogs who can feel things and still feel safe. Dogs who can notice things and then choose what to do next. Dogs who can express themselves without fear of punishment or praise-based manipulation. And when we start to see the neutral dog as an illusion, or perhaps even as a symptom of suppression, we begin to soften. We begin to accept that it's okay for dogs to care, to be curious, to hesitate, to seek, and to feel. And that perhaps is where real emotional maturity begins. But let's pause here for a moment and zoom in on one specific everyday moment that many of us experience with our dogs: greeting someone. Because if we want to understand the idea of the neutral dog more deeply, this is one of the clearest places to look. We're often told that a dog should be neutral around people and dogs, especially during greetings. They shouldn't pull to say hello, they shouldn't bark with excitement or uncertainty, they shouldn't jump up, hide behind us, hesitate, or show signs of concern. They should just be calm, stand there, and exist, be neutral. But let's ask ourselves an honest question here. Not as dog trainers or professionals or even owners, but simply as fellow relational beings. When you meet someone new, are you truly neutral? Do you feel nothing? Do you register nothing? Is your body still, your breath unchanged, your heart completely calm? Probably not. Even the most socially confident person registers a new interaction. They feel a shift. There's a flicker of anticipation, a rush of emotion, excitement, curiosity, hesitation, even protectiveness. Something inside us awakens because social interaction, no matter how small, is never just neutral. So why do we expect it to be that way for our dogs? Now let's take it even further. Because some people, dogs and humans alike, do appear visibly neutral in social moments. They don't rush forward. They don't express overt emotion. They hold themselves back, maintain stillness, and sometimes even avoid eye contact or retreat into themselves. And here's the uncomfortable truth we need to gently examine. Apparent neutrality is not always a sign of confidence. Sometimes it's a sign of internal suppression, emotional freeze, or past overwhelm, of learnt stillness, because stillness kept them safe once. We see this in trauma work all the time. When someone has been repeatedly overwhelmed, ignored, punished for expression, or forced to comply, they may learn to become emotionally flat in public spaces. They're not relaxed. They're disconnected. They've learnt that stillness is safer than being seen. And dogs are no different. A dog who stands still and doesn't respond to a greeting, doesn't wag, doesn't move forward, doesn't show interest, may not be calm. They may be caught in freeze. They may be masking discomfort. They may be waiting to see if it's safe to exist in this moment. In contrast, a dog who softens their eyes, lowers their tail, offers a little wiggle, sniffs the ground, or circles around gently, that's not being neutral. That's emotional intelligence. That's choice-based engagement. That's a dog reading the room just like we do. So we must be incredibly careful not to misinterpret quiet as okay, because sometimes the quietest dogs are the ones that are most in need of support. Let's look at it through another lens. Think of someone you know, a friend, a colleague, maybe yourself, who often presents as cool, calm, and connected in social situations. Maybe they don't say much. Maybe they keep their emotions in check. Maybe others describe them as so easygoing or laid back. But what's actually going on underneath? Are they truly unbothered? Or have they simply learnt to keep their inner world tightly held? And more importantly, is that always a good thing? Because in human psychology, we don't hold up being neutral as the pinnacle of health. We hold up authenticity. We hold up emotional regulation with expression. We value the person who can feel something and stay present with it, not the person who pretends nothing is happening at all. So again, we return to the dog. If your dog gets a little excited when they see a friend, that's not failure, that's relationship. If your dog hesitates before greeting someone unfamiliar, that's not a flaw, that's discernment. And if your dog offers you a look, a pause, or even a slow step behind you, that's communication, that's trust. Being neutral, it's not the goal. Responsiveness, expression, and emotional presence are. Because that's where relationship lives, not in robotic stillness, but in the space between emotion and safety, between feeling something and knowing it's okay to show it. So next time someone says, your dog should be neutral, you might gently just ask, why? And what do we lose when we make that the measure of success? Because perhaps the dog who feels and communicates and chooses wisely is the one who's truly emotionally mature. Let me tell you about a dog I met a few years ago. We'll call him Ben. Ben was what most people would call a dream dog. He never barked at strangers, he didn't pull on the lead, he didn't react to other dogs, even if they were barking or lunging nearby. When people greeted him, he stood still, quiet, passive, respectful. He was, as his guardian proudly told me, completely neutral. But something just didn't sit right. Because when I met Ben, even though he looked calm on the surface, his eyes didn't meet mine. His body was still, but not in a relaxed way. It was tight. His body was low, but not wagging. His posture slightly crouched, and his weight subtly shifted back onto his hind legs, as if he was preparing to retreat if needed. He wasn't present. He was just holding his breath. His guardian, a well-meaning and deeply loving person, had worked hard to get him to this point. She'd been told early on that Ben had reactive tendencies and needed firm structure to prevent them from surfacing. So she'd followed the advice, neutral greetings only, no fuss, no emotion, no socializing unless instructed. Any signs of excitement or hesitation were redirected, corrected, or trained away. And it worked on the outside, but on the inside, Ben had not become emotionally stable. He'd become emotionally silent. What looked like being neutral was actually shutdown. What looked like maturity was actually helplessness. What looked like emotional regulation was actually a dog who had stopped trying to connect, because connection was never met with curiosity, only control. Over time, we gently began to unwind the silence. We gave Ben permission to notice, to respond, to slow down, to sniff, to look, to think, to turn away, and to come back in his own time. His guardian began to soften too. Instead of narrating in a low, commanding tone, she began to talk to him, to name his experiences, to ask him if he wanted space. She stopped trying to create the neutral dog and instead started to create safety. And slowly, things changed. One day, during a walk in a quiet field, Ben met a young dog who approached gently. Ben paused. He looked at his guardian and she simply said, "It's okay, I see him too. Shall we wait together?" He sniffed the ground, circled around slowly, and approached in a curve. And then, with soft eyes and a little breath of release, he offered a calm nose touch to the other dog's shoulder. Not neutral, not passive, relational, responsive, safe. It was the first time in years he had made a social decision without being managed into it. And it was real. Not trained, not conditioned, just honest. That's what we're aiming for. Not emotionless dogs who perform calmness, but dogs who feel safe enough to be seen and supported enough to express. Because when that happens, there's no need to be neutral. There's just trust and growth and relationship. So if the neutral dog isn't the goal, what happens when we try to manufacture it? This brings us to two of the most common and often most misunderstood approaches in the dog world: flooding and avoidance. These may sound like the opposites at first glance, but they're often two sides of the same emotional coin: fear. Fear of behaviour, fear of the situation, fear of getting it wrong. So let's unpack both. Flooding is the word used to describe what happens when a dog is overwhelmed with a stimuli that they are not ready to process and offered no escape, no support, and no choice in the matter. It might look like this: taking a reactive dog straight into a busy park and waiting for them to settle. Walking a fearful puppy past building sites, barking dogs and crowds to get them used to it. Forcing greetings with dogs or strangers because they just need to be socialized. Staying in a situation far beyond the dog's stress threshold because we've been told that they'll eventually habituate. But what's actually happening in those moments? On a neurobiological level, the dog's amygdala, the brain's alarm system, is firing. Stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline flood the body. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for decision-making and processing, shuts down. The dog may freeze, pant, scan the environment, or try to escape. And if they can't, they may shut down entirely. What looks like calm is often collapse of hope. This is often called learnt helplessness, but it's more accurate to call it emotional shutdown. When the dog realizes that nothing they do changes the situation, so they stop trying. So yes, the barking may stop, but not because the dog feels safe, but because they've given up trying to communicate. And this is a short-term fix. Over time, their anxiety and their emotions will build up, and the reactivity will return with much more force than they originally had. On the flip side is avoidance, a strategy that at first it feels safer, more compassionate and more gentle, and it can be in the short term, especially when a dog is freshly traumatized, overwhelmed, or still recovering from stress. But when avoidance becomes the default, it creates its own emotional cost. It might look like this: never leaving the garden for fear of triggering reactivity, crossing the road every time a dog appears in the distance, even if your dog is still curious or calm, skipping vet visits, walks, or car travel because the dog hates it, but never helping them to learn to cope with it either. Avoiding all dogs, all people, all novelty, not because the dog can't handle it, but because we can't handle the discomfort of what might happen. And often avoidance comes from a place of care. We want to protect our dogs. We don't want to push them, and we're trying not to flood them. But over time, this can shrink their world. And just like flooding, something is being stolen: the chance to learn, the chance to grow, and the chance to realize that the world isn't always dangerous, especially explored with someone safe by your side. So what do both of these approaches have in common? They both happen when we, the humans, are afraid. Flooding often stems from fear of disobedience, fear of the behavior worsening, or fear of judgment from others. Avoidance often stems from the fear of triggering distress, fear of confrontation, or fear of failing our dogs again. Both are deeply human. Both come from a place of wanting to do right, but neither give our dog the one thing they truly need: support with regulation. Not overwhelming exposure, not complete avoidance, but gentle, curious, flexible support that meets them where they are. A client of mine, we'll call her Sam, adopted a young rescue dog named April. April had experienced trauma. She flinched at sounds, avoided people, barked at other dogs from across the street. Sam was told two completely different things by two completely different professionals. One said, just take her everywhere. She'll just adjust. The other said, keep her at home, let her settle, and don't do anything. And so, like many, Sam ping-ponged between them. One week, they went to the crowded parks. April would tremble and shut down, but everyone said, look how good she's being. The next week, Sam kept her in the house, barely venturing outside. April stopped barking, but she also stopped showing any curiosity. Her eyes dulled, her appetite shrank. It wasn't until we reframed the goal, not neutral, not obedient, not protection, but relationship and emotional resilience, That's when things began to change. We didn't avoid everything. We didn't throw her in the deep end. Instead, we guided her. Tiny moments of bravery, tiny moments of dialogue. Shall we sniff this gate together? Would you like to turn back now? Shall we watch for a distance? You're safe. Step by step, April didn't just cope, she began to thrive. She wasn't neutral with other dogs. She made decisions, sometimes to disengage, sometimes to say hello. She wasn't passive. She was present. And most importantly, she began to trust, not just the world, but her human's ability to read her, support her, and walk with her, not ahead of her, not dragging her forward, but alongside. So if you ever find yourself stuck between flooding and avoidance, if you're not sure whether to go out or stay in, whether to push forward or turn back, whether to risk the reaction or retreat into safety, ask yourself this: what would I want if I were in their body with their brain in that moment? And read your dog. What mood are they in at that moment? Are they telling you that they need to stay in, or are they telling you that they want the walk? Because dogs don't need exposure, they need understanding. They don't need silence, they need dialogue. And more than anything, they need a guide. Not a protector who hides them away, not a coach who pushes them through, but a companion, a translator, someone who can hold space for both courage and caution and knows that both can exist in the same moment. So now let's talk about the cost, not the behavioural cost, not the training setbacks or the frustration we feel when things go off track, but the emotional cost for the dog. Because whether we lean towards flooding or avoidance, something gets lost along the way, and that something is often a sense of self. So let's begin with flooding. Flooding, by its very nature, is traumatic. It pushes dogs beyond their emotional capacity and tells them, stay here, there's no way out, you'll get used to it eventually. And they might. But what they're learning is not resilience. What they're learning is compliance through collapse. Internally, their body enters a state of hyperarousal. Adrenaline floods the system, the amygdala lights up with alarm, the hippocampus struggles to process what's happening in real time, and the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that allows dogs to think rather than just react, begins to shut down. And when this happens over and over again, the dog may begin to show signs of what we might call functional trauma: flinching at sudden sounds, apathy during interactions, reactivity that escalates without warning, or the total opposite, stillness, a kind of emotional muteness. They become, in a word, disconnected, not just from their environment, but from themselves. They stop trusting their instincts. They stop offering communication, because communication hasn't been heard, only corrected, redirected, or ignored. This is the cost of chronic overwhelm, the loss of agency, the loss of trust, and the erosion of emotional safety. But what about avoidance? It feels safer, it feels like kindness, and sometimes it is, especially in the early days of recovery. But when avoidance becomes a lifestyle rather than a bridge towards healing, it creates a different kind of wound: emotional stagnation. We begin to see dogs who are understimulated but over-alert, anxious and silent, stuck in arrested development, like emotional adolescents who never got the space to grow up. They may appear easy on the surface, quiet, undemanding, slow to react, but inside they're unfulfilled. The world has become too small to make any sense of. In avoiding discomfort, we've accidentally avoided opportunity, and they haven't learnt how to cope, only that they should never have to. But to be clear here, there are some cases where some dogs just find the world too stressful, too much, and it's absolutely okay to avoid these situations in those cases. The important thing to remember is to go at your dog's pace. If your dog isn't coping at all with the outside world, do not force them to go into it. In some situations, avoidance is necessary, but we're not blanket terming this. We have to go with the dog that's in front of us. But here's what to remember. Dogs don't learn confidence through control, and they don't learn safety through silence. Confidence grows when we meet a challenge, not alone and not too soon, but with support, at the right pace, and with the freedom to retreat if we need to. Emotional safety isn't about absence of stress. It's about the presence of choice, the presence of dialogue, the presence of someone who notices how you're feeling and adapts gently in response. And this is why a canine dialogue dynamics approach is not about forcing outcomes. It's about creating conditions where emotional growth becomes possible. Because what looks like success in the short term, a dog who's silent, compliant, or obedient, might be masking long-term emotional harm. And what looks like slow progress, a dog who sniffs before greeting, who pauses before passing another dog, who looks back at you for reassurance, is actually a sign of emotional intelligence developing in real time. Let me tell you about a dog named Frank. Frank had been through both ends of the spectrum. His first home took him everywhere, busy cities, loud pubs, group training classes, because they were told it would socialise him. But he became reactive, defensive, and unpredictable. So his next home did the opposite. They kept him in a garden, avoided walks, didn't have any visitors, didn't risk anything. By the time I met him, he'd lost trust in both the world and himself. He didn't actually bark anymore, and he didn't lunge, he didn't growl. He just watched, quietly, carefully, and anxiously. He seemed easy, but he was living in a freeze response so deep that most people didn't notice. His eyes told a different story. It took months of micro-adjustments, using gentle narration, giving space to feel, slowly expanding his world without forcing it, before Frank decided to choose things again, not because he was ready to be exposed, but because he felt safe enough to explore. And that's the shift we're looking for. Not exposure, but expression. Not social performance, but emotional presence. So if you're listening to this and you feel the weight of the decisions you've made, if you've flooded your dog in the past or avoided too much for too long, know this: you are not alone and you have not failed. Most of us were never taught how to find the middle ground. We were only taught to react, to the fear of reactivity or the fear of getting it wrong. But you can build emotional safety again. You can begin again, not by chasing perfection, but by anchoring in presence. Start small, narrate what you both notice, offer choice, name a feeling, pause instead of pushing, and guide instead of avoiding. This is the way back, not to the neutral dog, but to relationship, not to passiveness, but to dialogue. And in that space, real healing begins. So where do we go from here? If flooding overwhelms and avoidance isolates, if neutrality suppresses and control disconnects, then what does healthy, ethical, emotional intelligence support really look like? Well, it looks like guidance, not control. And that's a subtle but profound shift, because control says, you must do what I say, regardless of how you feel. But guidance says, I'll help you move through this, gently, with awareness, and with room for you to feel. One is about compliance, the other is about co-regulation. But let's explore what guidance really means in practice, because it's not passive and it's not aimless, and it's certainly not permissive in a way that some critics assume. Guidance is intentional, presence, and responsive. It begins with attunement, noticing what your dog is feeling before you decide what to do. It continues through dialogue, using words, tone, movement, and energy to co-create safety. And it results in shared movement, not just physical, but emotional movement. The sense that we're in this together and I've got you. Guidance can look like pausing when you see your dog hesitate and saying, it's okay, we can wait. Softly asking, shall we go this way instead, when something ahead feels too much? Gently naming what's happening. I see that dog too. Shall we take a break? Inviting engagement without forcing it. Would you like to sniff? Shall we move on? These phrases are more than just words. They're bridges. They are cues for co-regulation and not commands for control. And even if your dog doesn't understand every word, they understand the tone, the presence, the predictability, and the intention behind the invitation. So let's contrast this with control. Control might look calm on the outside, especially to the untrained eye, but inside, it often feels tense. You'll hear phrases like, leave it, no, heel, come on, don't be silly. Even when delivered softly, these words are often loaded with correction, not connection. They carry the unspoken message, stop feeling what you're feeling, or worse, I can't handle you feeling like this. And what does that teach our dogs? That their emotions are a problem, that their curiosity is disruptive, that their attempts to communicate are inconvenient. So they stop communicating. And we interpret that silence as good behavior. But it's not good. It's absent. And absence is not regulation. Dogs don't need to be led like soldiers. They need to be accompanied like friends. And guidance doesn't mean letting them make every decision. It means offering choices within safety, just like we do with children. It's not do whatever you want whenever you want. It's let's figure this out together. I'll make sure you're safe, but I'll listen to what you need. And when dogs are raised in that kind of environment, or gently retaught how to expect it, they begin to trust their own instincts again. They begin to try things, to ask questions, to pause and look at us, not for permission, but for partnership. That's not control, that's connection. Let me give you a glimpse of what this might sound like on a real walk. You're walking through a woodland path. It's quiet, dappled with shade, but up ahead, you see a dog coming towards you. On lead, tense posture, possibly reactive. You feel your dog shift. Her ears perk up. Her body leans forward, not lunging, just alert. In a controlled-based framework, you might instinctively shorten the lead, pull her closer, give a firm cue, and rush past. But in a guidance-based framework, in a CDD dialogue, you might instead soften your shoulders, slow your pace, narrate what's happening. You say, there's a dog ahead. They need space. Let's move over here for a minute. You step to the side, invite her to sniff, offer space. You crouch for a moment, let her check in with you. And you say, shall we wait here while they pass? And maybe she chooses to stay still. Maybe she decides to turn away. Maybe she watches with interest, but then shakes it off and moves on. But whatever happens, she made a choice with connection. And you've made space for that choice, not by surrendering responsibility, but by guiding without pressure. This is the CDD way. Not just teaching behaviours, but shaping minds. Not through correction or avoidance, but through emotional partnership. Because in the end, guidance isn't about what we do. It's about how we are. It's about being steady when our dogs wobble, being calm when the world feels noisy, being clear without being controlling, and offering enough guidance to keep them safe, but enough freedom to let them feel. And when dogs are raised this way, or slowly learn how to expect that, they don't need to be forced into being neutral, because they're learning how to regulate through relationship. And that's a far more powerful connection. So when people talk about socialization, whether in puppy classes, group walks, or even rescue assessments, the conversation always returns to one thing. How does the dog behave around others? Do they ignore other dogs politely? Do they sit calmly around people? Do they walk through crowds like a pro? And if they do, they're often labelled as well socialized. And if they don't, they're reactive, overexcitable, or under-socialized. But let's pause again and ask, is this what socialization means? Because socialization, real, meaningful, emotional socialization, isn't about how many dogs your dog can ignore. It's about how your dog understands and navigates social dynamics. It's about how they feel in social moments and what they've learnt about safety, communication, and boundaries. And most importantly, it's about whether they have a human alongside them who can help translate the situation in real time instead of controlling it. A truly social dog is not one that ignores every dog. It's one who knows when to greet and when to give space, how to disengage without panicking, how to communicate discomfort appropriately, and how to recover from social tension without carrying it for the rest of the walk. And none of that is taught through obedience drills. It's taught through relationship. And let me say that again because it matters. Social maturity in dogs is not built through exposure. It's built through relational safety. When dogs trust their humans to observe, support, and communicate in real time, they stop trying to manage everything on their own. They stop barking to create distance, they stop lunging to self-soothe, and they stop shutting down to avoid conflict. Why? Because they have someone to help them interpret the world, to offer gentle narration, to create distance when needed, to say, with presence and calmness, you don't have to figure this out alone. And here's something we rarely talk about. Disengagement is not failure. In fact, it's one of the most emotionally mature things a dog can do. If your dog sees another dog and chooses to sniff the ground instead of engaging, curve away gently, look to you and walk on, that's not avoidance, that's discernment. It's your dog saying, I've noticed the other being, I've assessed the situation, and I've decided not to engage right now. How incredible is that? That's not being neutral. Not every dog is meant to be social with every dog. Not every dog wants to say hello. And not every dog who chooses to ignore another dog is doing so because they're neutral. Sometimes they're just being wise. We're not aiming for sociability on command. We're aiming for emotional autonomy within relationship. So the next time you wonder whether your dog is socialized enough, ask instead, do they feel safe enough to make choices? Do they have the language to say no without panic? Do they know you'll support them even when things feel messy or uncertain? Because real social maturity isn't about what the dog does. It's about what they know they're allowed to do. To greet gently, to disengage without fear, to retreat without shame, to observe without pressure, to be social when they want to be, and self-protective when they need to be. And that can only be taught through relationship. We've spoken a lot in this episode about how dogs are affected by flooding, avoidance, pressure, and silence. But there's a deeper truth underneath all of this, a truth that isn't about dogs at all, but about us. Because more often than not, the reason that we lean into control or fall into avoidance or aim for a neutral dog isn't because we don't care, it's because we care so much that we're terrified of getting it wrong. Let's be honest, we're bombarded with messages, online, in books, from professionals, all telling us what to do and what not to do. Don't let your dog pull. Don't let them greet others. Don't reinforce bad behaviour. Don't let them avoid things. Don't coddle them. Don't expose them to too much. And it's overwhelming, especially when you love your dog deeply and you're trying so hard to do the right thing. So when something goes wrong, when your dog reacts, when they bark, when they shut down or pull away, it can feel personal, like a failure, not just for the dog, but for you. And so we swing between I need to do more and I've done too much, between I'll just avoid it and let's get it over with, between guilt and frustration, fear and overcompensation. But here's what I want you to hear. This isn't your fault, not in the way you think. Most of us were taught behavior management. We were not taught relational guidance. We were not taught emotional attunement. We were not taught how to stay present through our own discomfort, let alone somebody else's. We were taught to train, not to feel with. And here's the beautiful irony of all of this. Your dog does not need you to be perfect. They just need you to be present. They don't need you to always get it right. They just need to know that when something feels wrong, you'll notice. You'll adjust, you'll pause, you'll care. That's what makes the difference. Dogs don't fall apart when you make a mistake. They fall apart when no one's listening, when no one's adapting, when their feelings are treated like glitches in their programming instead of messages asking to be heard. You will flood your dog sometimes. You will under-support them sometimes. You will get the timing wrong, say the wrong thing, miss a signal, walk them somewhere too busy, or misread how much they could handle that day. That does not make you a bad person. It just makes you human. And when you can name it, when you can say, that was too much, wasn't it? I rushed that, I'm sorry. Your dog feels it. Because dogs don't learn trust from perfection. They learn it from repair. They learn it when your next move says, I saw you, I heard you, I'll do that differently next time. And it's not weakness, that's emotional guidance. I want to invite you into something radical here. When your dog shows emotion, you don't have to shut it down. You don't have to fix it instantly. You don't have to pretend you're calm if you're not. You can name it. You can say, that was a bit much for both of us, wasn't it? You're worried, I get it. I'm right here. I'm feeling unsure too, but we'll figure this out. Your dog may not understand all of those words, but they do understand the tone, the rhythm, the shared sense of emotional reality. And something amazing happens when you do this. You stop modeling anxiety and you start modeling emotional honesty. And that's a real opposite of reactivity. Not silence, not neutrality, but presence through emotion. So if this episode has stirred something in you, if you're realizing that you've been trying to force neutrality or swing between extremes or manage instead of guide, let that be okay. You've not failed your dog. You've been operating from the tools that you were given, and now you have new ones. Not based in dominance, not based on reward pathways, not based on suppressed instincts, but based on relationship. Your dog doesn't need you to be a behaviourist. They just need you to be with them. To move from fear to feeling, from perfectionism to presence, from control to connection. So what have we uncovered today? We've questioned the idea that neutrality is something that dogs should be trained into. We've looked closely at what it really means to push a dog too far or to hold them back too much. We've explored the emotional cost of both and the quiet grief of watching a dog disappear behind stillness, silence, and compliance. But more than that, we've begun to see what else is possible. Because in truth, there is no such thing as a perfectly neutral dog. And that is not a flaw, that is a gift. It means they're alive. It means they feel. And it means they're present in the world, not numb to it. So instead of aiming for neutrality, let's aim for clarity, connection, communication, confidence. Let's raise dogs who know how to express discomfort without being punished for it, who know how to disengage without being labelled reactive, and who know how to say yes, how to say no, and most importantly, who know that someone is listening either way. Let's choose guidance over control, support over silence, and dialogue over performance. Because the real balance, the one that we're searching for, doesn't live in obedience. It doesn't live in training protocols or textbook behaviours. It lives in the quiet spaces between extremes, in the pause before a decision, in the invitation to turn away, in the moment that you say, "Shall we?" and your dog says, "Yes, I trust you." That's the kind of relationship that can weather anything. And it starts not with the neutral dog, but with noticing, with being present, with walking beside your dog as they become who they are and letting yourself grow too. Until then, be kind to your dog, be kind to yourself, and remember you don't need to be perfect to be the person your dog trusts the most. You just need to show up with love, with curiosity, and with the courage to do things differently. Thank you for rewriting the rules with me. See you next Thursday.